Welcome, everybody, to another episode of Your Spiritual Journey. This is Dr. Bob, and this is the space and the place where we talk about things important to your soul. As always, we ask you to like us, subscribe, and maybe even support us on Patreon. All of that helps to keep us on the air. Today, I have a very special guest. It's Reverend Caitlin Werth, and she's the pastor at Waverly Presbyterian Church, my church. Actually, it's her church right now.
It's our church.
It's our church. But she didn't move into ministry until some years after in social service. Her first ordained call was at Allegheny County Jail as the director of an interfaith rehabilitative program called Hope Pre-Release. She's a lover of nature, poetry, dogs, and singing karaoke. Most of all, she believes we were all made with love, from love, and for love. And that's something that I would have to say when Caitlin's in the room, love is there.
Oh, that's beautiful, Bob. Thank you. I think you oversold me with that introduction.
Thank you. So as we always begin, let's start with your spiritual journey from childhood until now, and then I'll get into some questions.
The danger is always that pastors are known for speaking too much. So you just have to interrupt me if I go on for long. I often tell people that my spiritual journey is a slower one. It's not one that had a big aha moment. I was lucky enough, blessed enough, however you see that in the world, of just knowing God was there since a very young age. A huge part of that is my parents. My parents are both people of faith in different ways, but that was just a part of what I knew to be true, that God loved me and loved others, and we were meant to love each other. So my parents were former hippies, so love was definitely a key word in our household. And my mom was Presbyterian. My dad was Catholic, and his religion changed later on. But we grew up going to church with my mom, my sisters, and I, and it was really a second home. I mean, very much how you feel about Waverly and how many people feel about Waverly. It was just a place where we were welcome and loved. And this was back in the 80s when there were lots and lots and lots of kids and teenagers in churches. And so, by the time I was in youth group, there were probably 30 to 40 kids hanging out.
How many sisters?
I have two sisters.
Okay.
Yep. One is I grew up with. She's just 2.5 years older than me. So we shared kind of everything. And then my younger sister was the surprise baby. So she's 8 years younger than me. So she had a pretty different upbringing, actually. And she didn't go to the same church that my sister and I grew up going to. Her youth group experience was different. But that was just always something I knew. And while I questioned different parts of my faith, I don't really remember ever questioning whether God existed.
Yeah.
I think I was gifted in that because I think what happens for a lot of people is God is defined too narrow. And so then when what they're questioning is more that box that people have put God in, but not if there is this great force of love. There are probably people who don't believe in the idea of a great force of love, but I think that's more appealing to most of us. And so I always believed that there was the great something out there that started us and helped us grow and was beyond mysterious. I was thinking about that this morning, thinking about this podcast, and I realized a couple things. One, I was recently told by someone outside of Waverly that they think my sermons are most characterized by wonder. And I said, oh, that's really interesting. I had never thought that before as a way to characterize them. And they said, well, you say the word wonder about 5 times in every sermon. And I had to go back and listen, and I really do. So it's funny how unaware we can be.
Yeah.
And I think that started actually when I was in high school at my church. We had this lovely couple that were sort of grandparents to all of us, and they led the high school Sunday school. And how they led it was by asking us questions and letting us talk. And it was not as much teaching as it was a place for us to explore some of those tough questions of faith. So in my formative years, I was encouraged that faith is something we're meant to question and explore. And so I think that had a real impact on who I became later in life and how I pastor, particularly how I preach. I think it's important for us to approach holy text with questioning. That's really what we're meant to do.
So where was it that you grew up?
I grew up in Aspinwall here in Pittsburgh, and went to Fox Chapel Presbyterian Church. So I grew up as a Presbyterian. And then when I went off to college, I went to a Catholic university. So that was my probably one and only real experience of being the only Protestant completely surrounded by Catholics. I think I was the diversity at that school. It was a pretty homogenous place, but a wonderful place. And that was really where I had a lot of connections in how faith leads us to serve. I had some of that growing up, certainly, in my youth group, but the Jesuit universities are really about 2 main things, which is education and service.
So which one was it? Which Jesuit
John
university?
Carroll University in Cleveland. And their tagline is creating men and women for others. And they really do that. And so I got to take a trip to El Salvador with a bunch of priests and some nuns and some fellow students from John Carroll, and also some seminary students, some fellows working towards becoming priests. And we were there during their election as international election observers. And this was only, I think it was only the 4th free election they had before they, when they were able to actually all vote. And so the role of international election observers was just to watch and write down if we saw anything that looked kind of shady. So that trip really tied to me for the first time how much faith can impact our politics and vice versa. So that was a key moment for me as well. And I also realized in my time at school that my acceptance of people of different faiths maybe was a little different than some other folks who worked in faith fields. We had a group on campus that was one of the few Protestant groups, and they were always trying to convert the Catholics. And I thought, well, they already have faith. What do you mean?
Right. Convert them to what?
Yeah, exactly. So it was around that time that I kind of thought, I'm not sure where I fit. I sometimes felt like I was too Christian for non-Christians or not Christian enough for the Christians. So then after I graduated college, there's a couple steps, but I came back to Pittsburgh unsure of what I was looking for in a church, a faith community, and found what at the time was a new church development, Hot Metal Bridge Faith Community. And that was one of the first places that I really felt, oh, these are people that really get what church is really meant to be. And there's a Philip Yancey book called What's So Amazing About Grace. And it opens with him talking to a woman who was really devastated, and he didn't really know what to offer her. And he said, well, why don't you come to church with me? And she said, well, I already feel terrible about myself. Why would I want to go to church? And I think sometimes that's the case for folks because they feel like you have to put on mask, something to come to church. And at Hot Metal Bridge Faith Community, it never felt like that. People were truly 100% genuinely who they are. And that opened some new things up to me in terms of when I felt the call to ministry, kicking and screaming. I realized, well, maybe it could be like this. It could be open and broad.
What was your degree in from John Carroll?
Yeah, it was sociology.
Okay.
Which was a good answer to I want to help people but don't know how. And didn't prepare me for too much. I did what's called in-home services here in Pittsburgh for just a little while, which is going into homes to work with families who either are in danger of losing their children or have already had their children taken away to try to help get their children back.
Yeah.
Also a little bit of adoption and foster care, which was, of course, incredibly challenging work. Also completely out of the realm of what any 23-year-old has qualifications for. So I think about that a lot too. But my faith helped me a great deal during that time. And then I started feeling the call to seminary. Do you want me to talk about that?
Certainly, because I'm always curious about people's inner voice. Like, what is a call? Where do you hear that? Where do you feel that? And what makes you know that it's the right decision?
Great questions. Great, important questions. And I think it's been different for me slightly each time. But let me see as I talk about it. Maybe I'll figure out if it was different each time.
Because you're looking forward to a new one, so you got to listen to that voice wherever it's coming from.
Yes. I will say, just before getting into this, that sometimes we don't hear a voice. And sometimes we have to trust in just taking steps and waiting to see when the voice will come. There's a great quote by Mother Teresa that she was asked about her prayer life at one point, and she said that mostly when she prays, she just listens. And somebody said, "What does God say?" And she said, "Mostly God listens too," which is what I often find in those times when I don't hear a call or a stirring or a voice is, okay, we're just listening in the same space.
Yeah.
But I would say that it started for me, my very first sense of call to seminary, though I didn't realize that's what it was at the time, was I did a year of AmeriCorps after graduating college, which is the program I did was AmeriCorps NCCC, National Civilian Community Corps, which you were assigned a team and a regional area, and you traveled to do different projects throughout that area. And let me tell you, I won the lottery of year of service because I served in San Francisco, Sacramento, Hawaii, and and Portland.
What a terrible job.
I know. And I had friends on different teams that camped the whole time. And we had, we stayed in this really cool hostel and then in this old historic schoolhouse in Hawaii. And just it was an amazing experience. It was actually in Hawaii that I went to visit a church, and I sat there listening to the service. And the pastor at one point said that he felt a lot of folks were afraid to give their lives fully to Christ because it means that if they do, God's going to ask them to do the one thing they don't want to do. Surely his sermon went on and had some wonderful points, but that's where my brain stopped. And I thought, oh, swear word, I'm going to have to be a pastor, which is interesting. That was the first thing I thought. I had never thought before about being a pastor. I didn't realize that in my mind at that time, that was the worst possible thing I could do. But apparently it was. So I sort of set that aside. I didn't really think about that at all until years later when I was attending Hot Metal Bridge Faith Community and got very active in that church. And the pastors started talking to me about how they felt that I had a call to seminary. And I really tried to shut it down. I told them that I wouldn't talk about the S word, as I called it. And I just could not vision myself ever serving a church. And one day I was sitting and praying during a church service, and I honestly, Bob, don't remember hearing the voice, but I remember, I don't know if I said it out loud or I just thought it so loudly in my head it felt like I said it. I said, fine, I'll go to seminary. So I remember my response more than the call.
Yeah.
Something stirred in me that I felt I had to actually respond. So I started looking, and because I'm stubborn, I said, well, I'm not leaving Pittsburgh, so I'll go, I guess, to Pittsburgh Theological Seminary, and started. And unfortunately, because I'm stubborn, my first year I had a real chip on my shoulder and thought, I don't know why I'm here. I'm so different from everybody. This is, I really didn't throw myself into it. And I didn't do it in a good spiritual way. I don't believe that I was praying very much at all my first year. However, during the end of my first year, a friend of mine reached out who was currently serving as a director of a summer camp in Allens Park, Colorado. Reached out to me knowing I was at seminary and wondering if there was anyone I could think of who might be interested in being a volunteer chaplain during the summer. And I said, sure, me. I'll do it. So I went out to Colorado for a summer to serve as the chaplain for the summer camp, and was reminded why I was drawn to this stuff in the first place. Just getting to see not only the kids and the teenagers, but the counselors and the staff, like being that person that people can come to with questions, getting to see what God is doing in people's lives, the questions they're exploring, being in the beauty of nature. I couldn't have asked for a better location, feeling God all around. So thanks to God for that, because I came back my second year with a much better attitude, thinking, okay, I can do this. And that way, with that better attitude, I realized, hey, I'm not that different from everybody else that is here. We are all people just trying to follow what we think God is leading us to do. And yes, we're different people, but I'm not really all that different from an average person, as you know, Bob. I don't know that I have anything all too special about me. So came back, and during my second year, we had to start thinking about a field ed experience. I actually had to think about it the year before, but ended up doing my first field ed experience at Hot Metal Bridge. So I wanted to do another one, and heard about a position at the jail. And I went and interviewed. And this was another time that I definitely heard God's spirit, heard the call. I walked into the chaplain's office where they had a bunch of folks from the Hope Pre-Release program at that time who were going to share with us. And I instantly had this feeling wash over me of, this is where I'm supposed to be. This is why I went to seminary. And had my interview with the chaplain at the time. We both said, yep, this is it. You're supposed to be here. I'm supposed to be here. And when I graduated, I did my internship my third year. When I graduated, there were no positions at the jail. So I continued just volunteering and looking for possible calls. Wasn't really hearing anything strongly, except I really think I'm supposed to be at the jail. So I took a different job in Pittsburgh, and eventually a position opened, and I applied, and it's really where I felt I was meant to be for what I thought would be forever, as it turned out, for 8 years. And then God spoke to me again.
All right. Somewhere in there you met Steve.
Somewhere in there I met Steve. Yes.
So how did he fit into this whole picture?
Steve is my husband, and we met in seminary. Looking back at pictures, we actually realized we were both on the same hike the first summer that I joined seminary, and I didn't actually remember that. We were standing next to each other in a picture. So I took a class before the fall to sort of ease my way into seminary, and he was in that class. And if I am honest with myself, I remember looking at him and thinking, oh, he's pretty cute. And then I learned he was married, so I said, okay, he's off limits. and just continued my seminary time. I knew who he was. He was a year ahead of me, so our paths crossed a little bit for 2 years, but not much because he had kids and he was married and I was single and living
Yeah.
off campus, and we just kind of ran with different folks. He went through a divorce right when he was graduating, so that was a year before I did. But then he worked at the seminary for a year, so I still kind of knew who he was for about a year. After I graduated, I was on one of those online dating sites, and
No.
yes, that's how people meet each other these days, Bob.
Okay.
Even 20 years ago. Well, it wasn't that long, 14 years ago. So it was one where it gave you matches, but you could also search for people. And they matched me with Steve. And I thought, oh, that's funny. I know him from seminary. Kind of kept moving on. And he sent me a message saying, hey, I see you're on here. Looks like we're both in a similar stage of life. If you ever want to get together, not as a date, let me know. And I
Not
thought,
as a date. Okay.
I thought, well, that's why I'm here. I have friends. So I didn't really pursue it. Thankfully, he is persistent and continued. He found me, I think, on Facebook. We had mutual friends. Long story short, he finally took me on an actual date. And it happened pretty quickly after that. I will say that was another, I don't know if it was from God, but probably a month into dating, I just knew I was supposed to marry him, which is wild. I heard people say those kind of things in my past. I was 31 at this point, so I wasn't, particularly young in terms of marriage, and had decided I would be happy being single. So I wasn't looking to get married. I just felt like,
Especially to somebody with kids.
He's my guy. Yeah.
That's a commitment.
Yeah. He also had other things at the time that I had always said I would never date, which interestingly, this would be interesting to you, Bob, was that he had a dog. And I always said, I'm never going to date anybody with a dog.
Oh. Okay. You're a cat person?
No, I didn't like the idea of the responsibility of a dog because travel was so important to me. I thought, I don't want to be stuck. What Bob knows and the listeners don't know is that I am absolutely obsessed with dogs now. So it's a good lesson, and you never know what God's going to open up to you. And kind of like that pastor in Hawaii, the thing you think might be the worst thing actually ends up being the best thing. And circling back to that has been my experience of being pastor, and particularly in a congregation. I had a lot of fears when I felt the call to come to a congregation and followed that through. I realized how completely perfect it is for me and the skills and interests that I have, and that it's the best form of... Ooh. Pardon me, folks. I just accidentally hit the microphone. And it is the best form of spiritual development that you're ever going to get, because I spend all my days thinking and talking and writing about spirituality.
Yeah.
So of course it's gonna grow.
How fun.
I think so.
What a job.
I think so.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I get to do that too.
I know.
How fun this is.
It is so fun. And Bob, you encouraged me for a couple of things. One was joining the Artist Way group that you led at Waverly. And that was another one of those aha moments for me. I remember being in that group and thinking, but I'm not really a creative, so I don't know how this applies to me. And thinking, I'm not a writer. And then I thought, Caitlin, you write a sermon every single week.
Right.
We can be so blind to the things that we do or who we are.
Yeah. Yeah, that's for sure.
Yeah.
And I don't know. I'm thinking about a couple things. One is Hot Metal Bridge, I believe, is where my son and daughter-in-law met you. And you probably weren't aware of them, and they weren't there for a real long time, and I think they were there at least a year. and they turned me on to Hot Metal Bridge,
Mm.
and Amy and I went to one service there
Oh, nice.
just to check it out. Uh, but I'd like to take you back to the county jail for a
Mm-hmm.
minute,
Sure.
because I'm curious about the sense of victimization that people have, and I've worked in the state prison system
Mm-hmm.
for a number of years, as you know, and a lot of people who are incarcerated feel that they've been victimized
Mm-hmm.
by the system,
Mm-hmm.
by society, by whatever their circumstances were,
Mm-hmm.
rather than having a sense that they've victimized somebody else
Mm-hmm.
and created another victim themselves. So I was curious about your experience with that sense of victimization, and if you saw that as prevalent as I feel it might be there, and if in your pastoring you found a way to pastor them through that.
Yeah, that's a great question, Bob, and it has many, it opens many different avenues, actually. Um, I can talk about it certainly, but interestingly to me, my overwhelming experience in the jail was kind of the opposite, where I learned that there is nuance to everything and everybody
Mhm.
has a story. And so
Yeah.
often, those who have victimized others um, often were victimized themselves, not
Yeah.
necessarily by the system. And I agree that that is a language that is sometimes used.
Mhm.
A phrase that's used often in jail is "I caught a case," which is obviously a passive thing rather than an active thing
Yeah.
that you have done. Um, and there's a lot about the system that is really unfair, and there's a lot about the system that could feel like it victimizes folks. And by the system, I'm including not just the prison or jail system, but our policing systems and housing systems
Mhm.
and all the
Yeah.
things that tie
Right.
together. Um, I was running a program, and so I had dual roles of program director and chaplain. And so I sort of had a gift of being able to call people out on things in a way that
Mhm.
maybe a lot of chaplains would not do.
Yeah.
And so the folks in our program theoretically sign up in order to do something positive with their time in the jail.
Okay.
Some did it because they thought it might look good for a judge, or
Yeah.
there were perks
Sure.
to being on the housing unit. Uh, but over and over again, I would hear people who quote unquote didn't come for the right reason that would say that to me. They would say, "I'm going to be honest with you, Pastor Caitlin. I came here for the better food or the whatever." But then I started to see some real other things. So even folks who, sort of came for the whatever reason, if they made it, if they weren't kicked out, if something, didn't come up, um, you started to see them take on some of that ownership, taking on some of that accountability. And part
Yeah.
of that was because of the classes we offered. So we did offer classes on cognitive behavioral thinking, which is how our thoughts lead to our actions.
Mhm.
And so there's a lot in there of confronting the victim mindset. We also had a class on victim awareness, which actually I taught, and was really a powerful class where folks were forced to think about how the way I would put it to everybody in the program was everything we do has an impact on ourselves and on others. And our
Mhm.
goal in this class is to increase the good impact and to decrease the negative impact.
Yeah.
And so folks would be thinking about how it's not just on them, but on how other people around them are affected by that. And I think for a lot of folks in the jail too, sometimes people are dismissing that they had their own history. And so there might be that counter, we tend to swing pendulums. If something's far one way, we swing it the other way.
Yeah.
And so there's a lot of defensiveness of, but I had bad things happen to me too.
Mhm.
And sometimes that's very true, unfortunately. We have people, not all, but I would say a huge majority of people that are in our criminal justice system have dealt with trauma of some kind.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm also curious that outside of the prison system, this sense of victimization can be taken on by anybody.
Mhm.
And have you felt the need, I guess, to help people through that feeling in just normal pastoring as a pastoral role?
Yeah. I meant to speak to the chaplaincy part of it as well. Yeah. As a pastor, you're focused a little bit more on what it is doing to the individual, and what it is doing with their connections to God and connections to others.
Yeah.
So my hope in pastoral conversations is that we get there, that we get to those places. And if someone comes to me, which has certainly happened, we all have our different challenges of this person's doing this and this and this and this, I try to ask the person questions that lead them to, and how do you deal with that? And where do
Right.
you see God working in this? What do you think you are called? How are you called to respond in this situation? How have you responded in the past? How have you seen folks respond positively to you? Where
Yeah.
do you see those kind of things? With pastoring, it's really more of an art than a science. So it depends on the person. It depends on the situation, what you
Mhm.
might say or do.
Sure. Yeah.
But sometimes there are times where you might just call somebody out. I will say, going back to the jail, I had done a tour of the prison. It's no longer here, but when it was in Pittsburgh, they called them uh, oh my goodness, I'm forgetting the name now. It's not prison, but correctional facility.
CSI.
CSI. Thank you, Bob. Yeah, so I went to the CSI and saw an individual who had been in the jail but had been
Yeah.
released when
Pardon
he
me.
was
It's
at the jail.
SCI, State Correctional Institution.
SCI.
Yeah.
Thank you. My memory is not good. And ran into a fellow who had been in our program and had left, and so I was disappointed to see him there. And I said,
Yeah.
"Oh my goodness, how did this happen?" And he said, "Oh, I was doing really well, and then I woke up here." And I said, "That's not how that happens." So there are moments where you just have
Yeah.
to say things. And there are moments where you ask more questions and try to get people to think
Yeah.
a little deeper.
Yeah. There's a sense that there's trauma in everybody that's stored and held and affects their lives on an ongoing basis. And one person's trauma, another person might look at that and say, that's not trauma. I had real trauma. Here's what happened to me. But your trauma is your trauma, however you view that.
Yeah.
There's a trauma that you went through that I'm aware of, and I'm sure you've had more than one, because we all have, but it's called COVID.
Yes.
And it was very interesting, your introduction to Waverly at the time that you were hired. So maybe you could talk the audience through that and how all that happened and how you dealt with it, because
Yeah.
I have to say that you had to look at that and say, God, you really called me this time to do this
Yeah.
now?
Yeah. Well, first, I do want to also say this might just be me getting on a soapbox, but I want to be careful of at least for me, the use of the word trauma, because I think we all have wounds. I think we all have challenges that we have gone through. I do not think every single person has gone through trauma. And the
Yeah.
reason I say that is because there's very different story, losing a friend, um, having someone very deeply mean to you. Those are not what I would consider traumas, at least not um, probably defined psychologically so. And I
Hmm.
say that because you're right, they're all different. But for people I worked with at the jail who had severe, serious trauma, I sometimes think we throw around that word, more than we
Yeah.
could. And that goes back to your victimization thing. It takes away our agency and it takes away the reality of what others
Right.
suffer.
Yeah.
COVID very well may have been a trauma for us all as a world. I think we're all
Yeah.
still coming out of that. I personally was incredibly lucky. I had a job that I could continue to do from home. My husband had a job that we didn't lose income.
Yeah.
We had kids, but they were of the age where they could be by themselves and do schoolwork.
Hmm.
So we had a lot of things that made it really not traumatizing for us individually. However, I got the call for Waverly, or started to get the call for Waverly. I think I applied in January of 2020. Um, the process to, at least in the Peace USA, to come to a church is a long one.
Yeah.
It's not a apply and then go. And Bob knows because he was on the pastoral nominating committee that I
Hmm.
came into the church. And um, I was still working at the jail when COVID hit. I think we were in talks, but I didn't, know certainly what was coming.
Yeah.
And ended up leaving the jail when it was still in full lockdown. So I had
Hmm.
started the process not knowing COVID was coming, and then took the call and started August of 2020.
Yeah.
So right in the middle of COVID. So my very first Sunday at Waverly was preaching to a camera and a few people in the room. And it was like that for 9 months. My
Yeah.
first 9 months. Our first service was Pentecost 2021, was in May, and it was outside. And
Hmm.
it took a long time for things to, quote unquote, come back to normal. It was a really interesting time to start a church, to say the least. But in some ways, I see some real gifts that came out of that for me. For one, everybody talking about, well, things returning to normal would also say, but maybe we don't need to return to normal. What
Uh-huh.
was working, what wasn't working, and what a gift that is for a pastor coming into a church.
Yeah.
So often, um, and this is just the nature of humans, we want what we've had for so long. And
Yeah.
so you hear a lot, pastors will hear a lot of, but that's not how we used to do it. I didn't hear a lot of that at Waverly. Thankfully, Waverly
Hmm.
is an incredibly gracious congregation. But every once in a while, you'd get well, Pastor so-and-so did it this way. Or,
Yeah.
um, but COVID really opened us up to a lot more, well, let's not do it the way that we've done it, which I think is also inherent in the folks there, pretty
Yeah.
flexible folks, but that was a gift. I also will say that it was a gift to me because I have always found I do better in jumping right into the deep stuff. I'm not great at
Hmm.
small talk. And what was great is that all of my conversations with people were not first, hanging around a coffee pot at a coffee hour. It
Yeah.
was one-on-one out in public or over the phone, or, and so it kind of eased me in as well. By the time we had a service where everybody was there, I had talked to most folks
Yeah.
one-on-one, which
Uh-huh.
really was also a gift. It also allowed Waverly to get back to itself in a really powerful way. The Do you remember? I think it was February of 2021 when the bridge collapsed.
Yeah.
The
Yeah. I
Fern
think you're
Hollow
right.
Bridge, which is
Yeah.
right by Waverly Presbyterian Church, collapsed. And I woke up to about 30 texts of folks saying, what happened, and did I hear the news? And I rushed over. And this was while we were all being very cautious of being with one another. We were not meeting, in person, really, I don't think, at that point, if it was 2021. It might have been 2022, but either way, what Waverly does is responds when people are in need. And so immediately the desire was to open the church so that we could offer bathrooms and food for those who were responding to the emergency. And we filled that up. People quickly signed up to be there all hours of the day. We had masks, but people were there in person. And I think that was a gift too, because it re-energized us.
Yeah, when there's a purpose and a need, it's people just really coalesce around that.
Yep.
Yeah, and it's a great feeling to be in service together.
Yeah.
That way. So.
And it was a nice first year because I wasn't really worried about programs or making sure things were happening the right way, quote unquote, but just getting to know people.
Yeah. Yeah, that's, I don't know, that was, like you said, a gift.
In some ways, yeah. I'm not minimizing how horrendous it was for other folks. And there was part of that, of course, pastoring people who were having a really hard time with it. Although I would say for many of our folks, we also are a more privileged group in terms of some of those things. But there were still folks in our community that really did suffer during that time.
Yeah. I'm going to shift the conversation a little bit. To something that has become pretty difficult in the last few years, and that's the separation between church and state, and the effect of politics on religion, and the effect of religion on politics. So can you talk about how a pastor has to deal with this world that we're in at the moment? And there are some churches that feel the need to be very political. There are some churches who say we're just apolitical and we can't do anything that's politically oriented. And then there's this term social justice, which kind of crosses boundaries. So could you address how you've had to dance around that, or just how most pastors have to, but how do you do that?
This is another one where it's going to depend so much on the pastor.
Yeah.
I believe strongly that each pastor is meant to live into who they are as a person. And one of my, I think, gifts is that I really can see things from various sides. I think that started a lot at the jail. And I want to have difficult conversations so I can live in tension. I don't need to make declarative statements. And I often am hesitant to make declarative statements. You've probably noticed that, where it's particularly on nuanced situations. So, for example, in talking about the Middle East, I think that there are things that we can say certainly. I absolutely believe that there are horrific things that are happening and we can call them out. And yet to talk about as if we know the solution, as folks here, certainly not. So I am not... while I care deeply about what I would call social justice, which means caring for equity, in society, working to fight oppression. I don't know that I am specifically vocal about that in terms of this person should do this. I think I speak more in broader terms. What I found lately is that Oh gosh, there's so much here, Bob. Where do I even start? Christian nationalism is real, and it is not new. It is something that Christianity, I'm speaking to Christianity specifically because it's the ground I stand in. I can't really speak to other faiths, but certainly happens in other faiths as well. But Christianity has faced this over and over again. We move, the history of the church is moving from movement to institution. We want to be a movement that's standing kind of against what powers be. And I believe that's where we started. That is where our faith began, to care for the least, the last, and the lost, and to not give in to the powers that be. However, we're human, and we end up becoming the institution. And then it changes again, and then it changes again, and then it changes again. You will see where the church is growing the most in the world is often in places where it is not the institution. That there have been all kinds of studies in when the church became much more of an institution in the United States, less and less people really identified as deeply spiritual. People could attend things but weren't really engaged in that. So that is something I will definitely speak out against. Faith should not be intertwined with power because it corrupts both, honestly. And that's happening. That's not just happening here in the United States. It's happening in a lot of places across the world. As a pastor, I think it depends on your location and your situation. I don't speak too much specifically about the situation because for the most part, while we do have a divided congregation a little bit, we're pretty homogenous in political beliefs. And so I have found that sometimes people want me to say something, not because they need to hear it, but because they want to be affirmed in what they already believe. Right. And that's a hard place as a pastor, is that we are meant to push and we are meant to challenge. And so the message that I want to give to people who already have a belief is, okay, you have that. What are you doing about it? But also, what are you doing then about the people you don't agree with? Because the answer is not to write them off completely. That is never a Christian response, is to say, well, I'm washing my hands of them. No, they're loved children of God. We disagree. But I do not believe in okay, they believe something, I don't believe, so I'm going to cut them out of my life. We are not called to do that. And so I think that is the challenge for folks that are in our world, including myself, being able to push ourselves to the harder thing. And that's the hard work of pastoring, because often people will come with a presenting problem. But the real issue is something deeper and harder.
Yeah. Thus, courageous conversations.
Yes. Having our courageous conversations group. Yeah.
And for those of you listening who aren't aware of what courageous conversations are, how did that come about?
Ooh, digging into my memory bank here. How did that start? I had lots of people talking to me about frustrations with people they loved who they deeply disagreed with, and in ways that they felt they just didn't even know how to talk to, but had a desire to want to keep up those conversations. And so I said, well, let's have a group that talks about that. It started with me doing something I had taken on from a previous church and kind of developed. And then we have a member who had done a lot of this work already as well, and so brought in her skills to continue that. And we have done book studies before at Waverly that also sort of talked about these issues. So I think it's a continual desire at Waverly. What I found challenging in that group was, and that others find challenging, is we can't control other people. So as much as so as much as we can open ourselves up to have the most compassionate view, and we can desire to sit at a table with another, we can't force another person to come to the table. So like most things, who we have to change is ourselves
Mm-hmm.
and
Yeah.
decide how can I best love folks who don't even want to have this conversation and still
Yeah.
disagree with me. And those are the kind of calls that I think faith calls us to, and they're the hardest kind of things.
Yeah. Yeah, that's something that I guess I've come to the realization also about peace,
Mm,
uh, is that you have to have peace begin with you.
yeah.
That
Yeah.
there's a song about that,
Yes,
I
there
think.
is. Yes. Yes.
uh, so that if you're looking for peace and you don't see it in the world, well, you got to start with yourself
Yeah.
and figure out, what brings you peace. Then how can you bring peace to people around you? And then how can you exemplify peace and let that grow from that point?
Yeah.
Uh, so to me, the Courageous Conversations was also about that. Like, okay, where do you start? Well, you start
We
with
start with ourselves.
yourself.
Yeah.
And that's important.
Yeah, it is.
So there's something going on in your life right now that's leading to a transition.
Yes.
So how did this come about that you're leaving us at Waverly?
Oh.
And I know we'll be with you always. But how do you look at this transition? Is this a new opportunity? And how do you feel about transitions?
Currently, I feel very much in the stage of God and I listening together.
Okay.
My husband has felt for some time. He's been at his churches. He had 2 churches that joined together. They're all but officially joined at this point. But he has felt for some time that he is meant to see them through the transition, and then someone else is meant to carry that forward. So we have known that. We didn't know exactly what that timing would look like, but we knew that would come at some point. He started to feel that in the fall, that it's coming. I think I'm going to need to leave. And we had to start tough conversations. What does that look like? For pastors, you're limited to your denomination, really. If you want to stay in a church, there's other possibilities like chaplaincy and so on.
Yeah.
And there are not all that many in the world. So we decided he would start a search, and that would include Pittsburgh, but open it up to see what else happened elsewhere. What made that hard for me is that I knew from the beginning I desired to stay in Pittsburgh, but I also needed to look, because if he was looking in a city, I would need to see, well, what could be there for me? And while he was able to make it clear to his church, I'm going to start looking, I couldn't do that to Waverly because I might be staying. So that was the hardest part of it for me. I like to be very transparent and open and honest. And so that was my biggest challenge through that time, was not knowing where God was leading, but knowing that I was taking steps to see. This particular call is very much led by God, but spoken through Steve. Steve and I have had so many conversations, and you think pastors talk a lot. Clergy couples talk a lot. We've over-talked it. And it's interesting because it's the first time we've really had to encounter what happens when one of us feels God speaking and the other one does not. But what I did feel clear on was I wasn't hearing God say no. I just wasn't hearing God. And I deeply believe that Steve was very clearly hearing God, and folks were hearing God say that he was meant to be there. So the one time I felt a sense of call, again, we were driving back actually to the airport from one of our interviews, not this one, a different one. And I felt the phrase, trust in Steve's call. come into my head, and it gave me peace. So you had asked earlier, like, what does it feel like to have a call? And I have experienced it mostly like it's not a different voice than my own, but usually saying something different than I would say.
Yeah.
It's that's how I know, like, I didn't say that one. It comes into my head, and then generally I feel a sense of peace. Even if I
Yeah.
don't like what it is, I feel
Mhm.
peace about, okay, I have that answer. And so from there on, it's really been an experience in trust, and it's a grieving because I love Waverly. I have truly fallen in love with every person in the community. I love being your pastor. I love every aspect of it. But I trust that not only does God have something else for me, God has something else for you. If
Mhm.
I'm called to leave, it's because there's something else that's meant to happen. It's
Yeah.
not the timing I would have chose, but that's not often how it works. God's timing is often different from us. And I am hesitantly excited to see what's next.
Yeah.
You asked how I deal with change. Years ago, I would have said I welcomed it. I was a much more adventurous person.
Mhm.
I have grown a lot of roots, and so that has made it more challenging for me.
Yeah.
But that, I think, is one of the gifts, because life is all about growth and change. And whenever we think it's not, we're honestly sort of fooling ourselves, because everything can change tomorrow.
Yeah.
Everything. You never know what is going to happen. And so we put up these illusions of control, and they give us comfort and security, but we don't know how they're going to last. And so I
Yeah.
actually think it's good for us to be broken
Mm.
out of those things. I think that's how our faith grows, but I think that's also just how we grow as people.
Yeah.
And while my human nature says, no, 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 my spiritual nature says, this is great. This is good. You don't know where God is going to lead you. And I was wrong so many times about what I thought would be good for me.
Yeah.
So I have to remember that I am not a good fortune teller. I am not a good
Yeah.
um, steward of my own self in some ways. I think
Mhm.
that I need to be open to the Spirit to what might be next.
Yeah. Have you, I don't know if this is a fair question, but I'm going to ask it anyway.
Great.
So, yeah, I'm assuming you've made a couple trips down to North Carolina.
Mhm.
Uh, so have you looked around yourself? And because you did say, as Steve was looking, you went ahead and
Mhm.
explored yourself just
Mhm.
to see what possibilities were. Have you sort of said, okay, well, that's possible, that's possible, that's possible?
Yes. Yes, and
Yeah.
there's a great book about faith that is connecting faith to improv. And if any of the listeners are improv lovers, the yes and is a really important part of faith. Like, yes, this is happening, and what am I gonna
Yeah.
do knowing this part is happening?
Uh-huh.
I have looked, and I don't know yet.
Mm-hmm.
I am
Yeah.
still waiting to see.
Yeah.
So it's a very open space,
Mm-hmm.
and that also, I think, is a gift, because um, that's where real trust comes in.
Yeah.
And there are possibilities. None of them are, I would say, close to firm yet
Yeah.
at this point. So we will
So,
see. Entering into the
any
unknown.
need for professional karaoke singers?
I wish.
Yeah, there's, I don't know. I think that's a good one to have on your resume.
Professional karaoke.
Yeah.
Bob, I don't think you know the extent of how deep it went. Years ago, when I first came to Pittsburgh as an adult, my early 20s, there was a karaoke bar I frequented enough that the DJ, when I came in, would put my song on without asking, and would also always have some chocolate on hand because he always knew that I wanted
Okay.
chocolate. So I was a regular.
All right. Well,
And I can't believe I just admitted that
there's
to all of your listeners.
okay. Believe it or not, we have chewed up an hour,
Wow.
and it's been so much fun.
Thanks.
At the end of each podcast, as you know, I give the guest an opportunity to leave the audience with a few words of wisdom, realizing that many of the Waverly folks will be listening to this. So this is your opportunity to do that.
Ooh, thank you. First of all, I will say I don't know how much wisdom I have. I think that most of us are called to do things, and some of us are called to do stuff that we don't feel adequately prepared for. Much of the wisdom that I have comes from other people, other things that I have heard or said, heard other people said or seen. But as you mentioned near the beginning in my bio, love is the greatest thing that I believe. And I do believe that each and every person is so deeply loved, created out of love, and made for love. That is what we are here for. That is what we are meant to do. And that means you matter. And it also means that every other person matters.
Yeah.
And so that leads back into my message that I got from the jail of everyone has a story, and we are meant to lead with love and try to hear those stories.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that the person who talked about the word that you use the most in your sermons, well, I would say it's love. Because
Thanks,
we just hear that message over and over, and you can never hear it enough.
No, you can't.
No. So thank you
Thanks.
for your love.
Thank you. And thanks to all of you Waverly folks that are listening. I love you.
So audience, as always, take what you've heard, incorporate into your life what resonates with you, put the rest on a shelf until you're ready to deal with it. And until next time, this has been your spiritual journey.